We have Stephanie. Pronouns are she, her. She's in Maine. And I love how her topic plays into what we've been talking about because she wants to talk about the misguided, debunked science of conversion therapy,
Oh, yeah.
which I was hoping that it's one of those really ugly topics, but I was hoping that we'd touch on it in terms of pseudoscience. So, Stephanie, yeah, thank you for calling.
Oh, you're quite welcome. And thank you for discussing this topic. It's really quite fascinating. But I wanted to get your take on on therapists who have been in practice for years and years and years, who pretty much have had their theories debunked. Thinking specifically around the notions of conversion therapy for gay people, for trans people. A man who was part of the rewriting of the DSM, Ray Blanchard, came up with a theory about trans people called autogynephilia, which has been widely debunked. Yet, one of his acolytes and colleagues at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto, Kenneth Zucker, practiced there for years, like 30 years, before he was finally dismissed in 2018. And of course, Canada has banned conversion therapy quite recently through legal action. And I wonder if you might want to talk about how science changes and how the legacy of medical respectability can cling to folks like Ken Zucker and Ray Blanchard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, let me, I guess, just first come out and say, like, very clearly, in case there's any confusion, since we're raising the issue, that there is absolutely no validity to the notion of conversion therapy. Even if we could change somebody's sexual orientation or their gender through that type of therapy, I don't know why we should or why we would want to, but the simple reality is that we cannot. We cannot. That's been proven over and over and over again. And you'll see that from the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, on and on and on and on. So I just want to make sure that if somebody's been living under a rock and has not caught that information, that we're very thoroughly announcing that. But beyond that, I hear the challenge around like older therapists not necessarily staying current with the times, and that's a really tricky wicket. Like, the truth is, in this field there is not a lot of oversight once you are licensed, which certainly took a lot of time and energy and effort to do well, but is not particularly prohibitive. I know tons of really bad therapists, I guess is what I'm trying very politely to find a way to say. I graduated with a bunch of very bad therapists, and such people exist. But I feel like I'm rambling, and so I'll maybe let Emily jump in here quickly. But I guess I just want to say that, yes, there are plenty of very experienced and very talented older therapists, and they are an incredible asset to our community. And yes, most of these theories and modalities that worked well 30 years ago do work well today. And yes, the new modalities that we're coming up with kind of seemingly every day, there's some sort of new fad, are not really particularly more magically effective than some of the things that we've been using for 30 years. All of those things are pretty much true, while at the same time, I think most folks would be shocked to recognize that people at the beginning of their career tend, according to research, to be much more effective therapists. People are often very uncomfortable seeing an associate therapist or an intern therapist or somebody who has been practicing for less than 5 years. And, with good reason, I suppose, as people are still getting their feet under them. But I do want to tell you that the research suggests that those people are oftentimes going to be much more effective, particularly if they are somebody that you can connect with. Like Emily's been saying, most of therapy just comes down to the therapeutic relationship and how comfortable you feel in that relationship and in the conversation with them. So let me back off and Emily, let you jump in here, please.
Yeah, Stephanie, I think you bring up such a great point, right? When we're talking about being scientifically minded people, we have that understanding that science is always checking itself and reframing its ideas, right? And progressing in a way. We're interested in things getting better and being more effective. And often that means leaving behind things that we discover are actually harmful, right? Like you think we're on the DSM-5, right? So there's been 4 other versions that have things in them that we say that no longer exists, or that's no longer a problem, or we're no longer going to use that language. So even when we're talking about, scientific progress and progress in mental health treatment, understanding, we're also talking about things that are impacted by humans, by things like religious abuse and religious ideas about sexuality, that are impacted by racist ideas about people and sexuality and human practices. So I think really it's up to the field to continue the scientific progress and to reject publicly practices that are determined to be harmful to people, right? And to very vocally work against people who maintain positions of power while espousing, treatment systems or ideas that are destructive to the people they're claiming to help.
Mm-hmm.
If I may, I'll just say that I may be stuck in the '90s a little bit, because that's when I really had some continuous interaction with the therapist community, and as you may know, that's kind of when Dr. Blanchard's ideas were prevalent in around the phenomenon, or if you call it that, of transgender folk, and I was quite lucky. I found a really good therapist who thought, who had enough real life experience with trans people to realize that these notions were absolute bunkum. And I was lucky in that regard. I was also, I found more value in friends of mine who were sort of in the woo community, that they were shamans. And they gave me far more help than the accredited doctor who contributed to the DSM to the DSM throughout his career and continues to do so. So it's just, I think there's a little bit of a back and forth with, as you say, what works for you is probably the most important thing.
There's certainly an aspect to that, Stephanie. And yeah, it is a lot about like, does this feel right? Does this resonate with me? Is this a exercise or a strategy or a thought process that feels real and that I can get behind? But I guess I also just want to highlight the fact that, forgive me, my words are kind of escaping me here, but the really significant aspect to all of this is whether or not the therapist is trying to push their particular agenda for you. If a therapist's only goal is to help you to reach your goals, you're going to likely reach your goals. But if the therapist comes in and says, well, but you're drinking too much, or well, you're working too much, or well, you're confused about your gender, you're confused about your sexuality, and they're trying to tell you about you and then trying to reshape you into some platonic ideal that exists exclusively in their mind, that's never going to be good therapy, regardless of the strategies that they're applying. So I hope that that can provide a little bit of a through line, just the notion that we are always looking for therapists that support us in meeting our goals, not a therapist who's going to try and force us towards or push us in the direction of some sort of like imaginary universal right way to be.
Yeah, I think it's a back and forth. Therapy is a conversation, really.
Sure.
It's where, who is this person? I mean, I think the best therapists are the people that are the most curious about who they are talking to, and don't necessarily have preconceived notions as to. Well, certainly in some cases, especially in the case of conversion therapy, that you're wrong. If you go into a therapy environment and the therapist is basically saying you are wrong from the get, they're not curious as to who you are in the first place. You know,
and
so
even from the
where
other side of that,
I feel like it's a back and forth for people.
Yeah, and I'll just acknowledge that from the other side of things, when people come into me or come into my office and they say, this thing about me is broken and I want to fix it, or I have like this addiction, or I have this whatever, and I need you to help me change it. If it is something that I don't believe can be changed through therapy, if it's a change that they are wanting to make, even if I trust the client to be the expert on themselves, and even if I feel that it is my job to be here to support the client, if their goal is not something that I can get behind because they are trying to not like affirm their gender, but like rip it out in some way. If they are trying to not maybe channel their sexuality, but are wanting to like break it in some way, I'll be very upfront with them that I don't know that I can help them do that. And perhaps we can't do good work together. And if your therapist is not having those types of conversations with you, then I don't know if the relationship will work. But I do really appreciate you raising the issue of conversion therapy with this. I think that's something we definitely needed to get into tonight, Stephanie.
All right. Well, thanks for taking the call, and you sound like the kind of therapist I could work with.
Well, glad to hear it.
Stephanie, thank you so much
You're
for
hired.
calling. That was a great conversation.
Bye.
You have a great
All
night.
right. Thank you,
Bye.
Stephanie.